Hello everyone, and a very good morning from Lahore, Pakistan. And this is the 14th lecture, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, on the topic of drowning. This is the second lecture of drowning and 14th lecture in the series of asphyxia. So the learning objectives of this lecture will be that I will be discussing in this lecture the typical drowning. And the learning objective of this video lecture will be that I will discuss its process in fresh water and in salt water. Then I will be discussing in this lecture the mechanism of death in typical drowning, the process of drowning, and what is the role of natural buoyancy if someone is drowning, and then mechanism of drowning, how then drowning occurs even if the body has natural buoyancy to float, but even then the drowning occurs. The other objectives will be that we will discuss two diagnostic signs of drowning, which are pathognomonic externally, fine froth formation and cadaveric spasm. So these two are external diagnostic signs which are visible from outside, fine froth formation and cadaveric spasm. Then I will discuss the cause of death in drowning and its fatal period. Now the typical drowning, starting with the topic, which is also called as wet drowning. It is also called wet drowning because in this the water is inhaled. That means water actually enters into the lungs and then it interferes with the process of respiration. And this entry of water into the lungs reduces the chances of survival. And this depends upon the water medium, that is fresh water or salt water, that is sea. Fresh water is in the ponds, river and canals, and the salt water is the sea water. Then the mechanism of death. In freshwater drowning, what happens in freshwater drowning is that in freshwater drowning, when the water enters into the lungs, it is hypotonic water and it will enter into the circulation, and this will cause hypervolemia, increase in the volume of blood, and it will hypotonic, it will become now hypotonic. The RBCs will burst open and potassium will be released from the RBCs into the circulation. So there will be hypervolemia because of increased amount of water in the circulation. Hyponatremia, sodium will be diluted and it will be reduced in amount, and hyperkalemia, that is raised potassium which has been released from the RBCs. Then the heart is then subjected to anoxia, hypervolemia, hyperkalemia, and hyponatremia. So these insults will markedly damage the heart, and the hyperkalemia and anoxia, they cause ventricular fibrillation. So in freshwater drowning, because of anoxia and hyperkalemia, ventricular fibrillation will occur and death will occur in 4 to 5 minutes. Whereas in saltwater drowning, the electrolytes from the seawater will enter into the circulation and the seawater is hypertonic, and there will be also loss of water from the circulation into the lungs, that it will extract water. Seawater is hypertonic. It will extract water from the circulation, and electrolytes of seawater will enter into the circulation. Reverse will happen to that of fresh water. So as there is marked hypertonicity of the inhaled water, this causes loss of fluid from the circulation into the lungs, causing pulmonary edema. And the water from the circulation now will enter into the lungs, and this pulmonary edema and hypovolemia will occur, which are both not good for maintaining the circulation and process of respiration. So there will be progressive hypovolemia because of regular influx of water from the circulation into the lungs, and circulatory shock will occur, and eventually the heart will stop beating. Cardiac standstill, asystole will occur. So in seawater, death is delayed. Death is up to it takes 8 to 12 minutes. So it is prolonged than in fresh water. So the mechanism of drowning now I will discuss. As we know that there is a natural buoyancy in our body in water, that body tends to float. And this is because that the body weight is made up 75% is water and 5% is fat. So 75 plus 5, that's 80% of the weight of the body is lighter than the water, and there is tendency to float. So the fat and the water having lesser specific gravity, that is 0.92, and there is tendency to float. So this is called as natural buoyancy, because the major portion of the body, water and fat, has a natural tendency to float, and this is known as natural buoyancy. Now the process of drowning. How drowning happens. When a non-swimmer falls into water, he will initially sink, partly owing to the force of fall and partly because of the weight of the body. So when a non-swimmer falls, he tends to sink down because of the falling force and the weight of the body. Person first rises to the surface because of the natural buoyancy, natural tendency to float, and due to the trapped air between the body and the clothes. It also plays a role. So all these factors, the struggling movements of the body, the air trap between the clothes, and the natural tendency, the person initially first rises to the surface, that is floats. And on coming to the surface, violent attempts to breathe in and shout are made. And this is the time when some air is inhaled into the lungs, but water also passes into the mouth, and some of it will be aspirated into the air passages, and some is swallowed into the stomach. There will be violent coughing, and this will due to because of the aspiration of the water. And because of this violent coughing, some of the air will be expelled out, and it will be replaced by water, which is drawn into the lungs. So violent coughing will exhale air and inhale water. And the specific gravity of the body will now start raising, and the body will sink below the surface once again. Then again the irregular movements of the limb may once again bring the body to the surface, and it may sink again due to further inhalation of water. Then that means body raises to the surface. Again, water is inhaled and it enters into the air passages. And this happen coming on the surface and going sinking down. It happens again and again. And finally, the body sinks to the bottom. By this time, the consciousness is lost. Person may flounder aimlessly in water due to vestibular disturbances and loss of sense of direction, which is because of hemorrhage in the tympanic membrane. So because of the pressure of water, violent coughing, so it will lead to hemorrhage, which will disturb the vestibular balancing mechanism, and person will lose sense of direction. And this hemorrhage is due to increased pressure of water which is surrounding. And the person will sink to the bottom. And two diagnostic signs of drowning which are visible from externally. First is formation of fine froth, and second is cadaveric spasm. The formation of froth, this is very fine froth. When the respiratory efforts continues, the air passages and the lungs are filled with water. And this water irritates and stimulates the secretion of mucus from the lining membrane. Water, respiratory mucus, and air, they get churned up due to violent respiratory efforts, and it produces fine froth which blocks the air passages. This is fine froth which is coming out. Then the cadaveric spasm. As we know, the cadaveric spasm is the last voluntary act. It is the record of last voluntary act, also called as record of the volitional activity at the time of death. So cadaveric spasm means that the group of muscles they go into spasm in a condition when there is extreme fear, threat to the life, and that will cause cadaveric spasm, and that usually happens in drowning, and the person get holds of the beads or sand in his hand, which are tightly clenched. As in other cases of rapid asphyxial death, convulsion or spasm of small group of muscle will take place, and the contraction commonly occurs in small muscles of hands and continues without going into primary relaxation after death. This is cadaveric spasm. In such spasm, the hand may close on weeds, mud, or sand, and these will remain in tightly clenched hands, which is a proof of antemortem drowning. This is a picture of the tightly clenched hand holding the weeds. Then the cause of death in drowning. Number one is the asphyxia. Asphyxia is the most common cause of death, and this results from obstruction to the air passages by inhaled water, laryngeal spasm due to entry of water into the nasopharynx or larynx. And second important cause is ventricular fibrillation, which occurs in fresh water. In fresh water, the water is inhaled, it enters into circulation, there is hypovolemia, and this will cause the burst opening of the RBCs, and the RBC will release potassium. So this abundant amount of potassium will cause ventricular fibrillation in freshwater drowning. Then cadaveric cardiac standstill, that is in the vagal stimulation. That is in the salt water drowning. That means when their hypertonic water is inhaled, it extracts water from the circulation, and this will cause hypovolemia and circulatory collapse and cardiac asystole. Then death can occur from other causes also, like vagal inhibition due to impact of water on abdomen. The person falling as per abdomen, water striking the abdomen, and the solar plexus in the epigastrium will be initiated, excited, and it will cause vagal inhibition. Or hypothermia, in intense cold water, just by the touch of feet or hand or any part will cause intense vasospasm and vagal inhibition, excitation of the vagus nerve, and that will initiate vagal inhibition. Then concussion of brain, that a person may fall and it may be striking to the head, and that will cause the concussion to the brain. So without any visible injury on outside, the person falling in the water and striking head and causing concussion of the brain. Then injury to the vital organs during the falling into the water or diving, the injury to the vital organs may occur, and that can cause death. Then any other medical causes of death which the person become unconscious before falling into the water. So other medical causes can be the cause of death other than drowning. For example, the epileptic attack, heart attack, rupture of intracranial vessel, this can occur before the person even fall into the water. Then the secondary drowning. In secondary drowning, when the person has been survived from drowning and afterwards, because of the complication, the person will die. And these complications are exhausted heart, electrolyte imbalance. So they can cause other complications like inhalation of infected water, polluted water can cause pneumonia or other fatal complications. Then regarding the fatal period, death occurs in about 5 minutes in complete submersion. And in fresh water, it is quicker than salt water. So it takes 5 to 8 minutes in fresh water, whereas it takes 8 to 12 minutes in salt water. So summary of this lecture is that we have discussed in this lecture the typical drowning, and we have understood its mechanics and what are processes involved in freshwater drowning and saltwater drowning. And we have learned the mechanism of death, the process of drowning, and role of natural buoyancy. Then what is the actual mechanism of drowning if natural buoyancy is there? So we have now understood that. Then we have learned the two external diagnostic signs of drowning, that is the fine froth and the cadaveric spasm. Then we have understood the cause of death and the fatal period. Thank you very much. So this is all about the lecture number 14. Take care. Allah Hafiz.